Hey, good morning. I would like to cover some important system design problem today. We have talked about three types of collaborative projects that I want to do with the community and the folks who are seeking to learn and improve every single day. As part of the collaborative projects, the top one is system design. I think it's going to be very helpful, either it's in terms of interviews or even from a standpoint where you're trying to design something under the roof of your particular job that you're good at. It is kind of important to follow through this process. Especially for me, I think this was very helpful in understanding the whole process and how do you go about the system design. I've started collecting some very important and interesting questions. I wanted to keep it relevant. So what I did is I started with a simple research on Grok. You can use whatever is most comfortable and makes sense to you and your accessibility to these chat AI tools. Grok is my go-to tool, and I do believe it does a great research. So I try to curate the top and relevant questions that Fang or Mang is have asked in the recent past, and also what are the specific design system design questions that can help the future applicants for Mang companies and also companies which are up and coming in the big tech, right? So after curating some of these questions, I'll walk you through the whole process in a minute here. I picked one top system design question I want to talk through, and there is a reason why. So without any further delay, let's get started. So I have created a simple prompt. Real-time system design questions are a staple in interview technical questions, technical interviews, particularly for roles at Fang and other top-tier tech companies. So that's my initial prompt. So I went about collecting a lot of questions, and then I curated them. I can read through the whole process here and what my prompt resulted, but I figured there's a much better way to communicate this. So I quickly pivoted to what we call the mind map, which is the brand new edition or feature within the Notebook LLM we have been talking about. This is my favorite tool by far, and now they have added this new feature called mind map, where you can clearly get to your interpretation and the fastest way to grasp any information or content out there. So what I've done here is I created um, a very simple mind map using the interview questions, right? And then I went back and curated what is going to be helpful for us to go over, especially in a video like this. So the content can be precise, easy to understand, and very digestible. So I went ahead and created a couple of things. Let's go over real-time system design interviews. So this is the mind map I've created. I thought this was phenomenal, just the way it can clearly articulate what I'm trying to achieve. So starting with the real-time system design interview prep, that's the key topic today. And I have researched using Grok what are the most recent and relevant questions, especially focusing on questions that were asked in the recent interviews by Mang and Big Tech. So these are the interview questions. It clearly categorized and made it very easy for me to digest and actually share in this video today. So real-time notification system, we can double click and see what that means and what you need to focus on while during a system design problem you're trying to solve. So let me go back to the high level here, and then we can double click on the specific interview question I want to talk about today. So real-time notification system, real-time leadership, leaderboard, coding platforms, real-time payment system can be applied to any domain in this context. This is a great interview question. We'll get back to that maybe in the following YouTube video. Today, I want to talk about the real-time surge pricing system asked by Uber. This was an actual real-time question I faced during my interview at Uber. So let's get to that. I do want to read out the rest of them. Real-time monitoring system, which is basically monitoring the activity of any platform or business you're trying to lead. Real-time chat system, WhatsApp or Slack. It could be an application around generative AI. So let's dive into the topic of interest today, the real-time surge by Uber. So I'm going to go here, go back to the mind map, open the mind map here. So recent interview questions and real-time pricing system by Uber. So some of the aspects we want to keep in mind is dynamic pricing, location and demand-based situations, and the key considerations while designing a system, while solving a system design problem. Okay, that's a lot and a handful of things we want to remember. I'm going to share this mind map with the team once I have this content up and ready on YouTube. Now let's bounce to the step-by-step approach in designing pricing system, especially in the context of ride-sharing app like Uber. So I know that's a handful. I want to break it down, make it very, very clear. After identifying the system design problem and trying to clearly demonstrate how you can solve methodically step by step, I would start with three main components. Component one, clarify the requirements. This is anything to do with what marketplace you want to focus on. So if this is an Uber question, Do we want to understand and solve this pricing problem at a global scale or to a specific marketplace like USA? Then move on to trying to narrow down your focus. So that's the key here. Any clarifying question to clearly represent and achieve, how can you narrow down the focus, make it more relevant and specific for the interviewer to understand your key points and thought process, right? So narrow down your marketplace as much as possible, narrow down your metrics as much as possible. So questions like, am I solving for pricing where profitability is the key objective? So definitely touch on the key objective, trying to increase the profitability for Uber as a platform, or we are actually trying to understand the demand of the drivers, where you might also want to focus on getting on board new drivers and maybe give an incentive to them. So these are key considerations, both qualitatively and quantitatively. Definitely ask those questions. So marketplace, the key objective or the business problem statement, the important things to focus on during any of the clarification questions. They should always, again, focus on to narrowing down your focus and your the final end result of the system design. Then assumption, component number two. Component number one is clarifying the requirements. Component number two is assumptions or guardrails. What are the guardrails you want to keep in place to play around with your system design problem? Should you handle a couple of them? I can read through here very clearly. Are we prioritizing how low latency over consistency, or do we need strong consistency for pricing? Are there constraints on pricing changes? So a couple of them which I can articulate very clearly is, if you are understanding the pricing system and there are constraints I would talk about is, today the average pricing of an Uber ride is 1x. That's the ranking algorithm or the pricing system you have in place. That's, we can call it BAU. Now the futuristic or the future state, we want to create a dynamic pricing system which could go up to 4x. Do you want to log that number as 4x? It can never go beyond 4x, which is very important for pricing system, because you don't want the future state recommendation engine to give a customer a pricing something around 100x or 10x, which is not right, and at the same time you might end up losing the customer. So place these guardrails very clearly, talk about these assumptions. So 1x to 4x is the range to play with from pricing standpoint. What is the average time bound you want to think about? Definitely place constraints there as well. You cannot exceed 15 minutes of wait time, which is very good considerations to have while you're designing the pricing system. And one more good constraint to have, think about the platform, think about the different pieces of the ecosystem, like drivers, users who are placing the Uber request, and the platform itself, the recommendation engine and the pricing system, all of them together. So the third important assumption would be, if you want to assign a driver, can that driver be in the 5 mile radius or 10 mile radius or 50 mile radius? If the interviewer comes back and asking, can you test for all three, you would repeat your experiments for all three and see and understand the risks. So we have covered component number one, which is clarifying requirements with marketplace, and narrowing down your focus on the pricing system. Component number two is the assumptions or guardrails. And number three, which is the actual flesh of the interview. You need to cruise through these components and get to the architecture or the actual system design. So I have created and used Napkin.ai. We talked about how mind map helped us to give us a high level overview of what a system design problem should consider and your approach. And here, this is a beautiful view created by Napkin.ai, my second most favorite thing for operationalizing and helping understand any kind of content. So let's get to this. Designing a real-time search pricing system. You're basically understanding the requirement clarifications. We just talked about performance metrics, which is the real flesh of the interview. Even though all of these components and the process and roadmap are important, you should always slow down and understand the performance metrics, which is the flesh of the whole interview. You need to get to this point as soon as possible, but very methodically, and trying to help them understand the trade-offs, why you got to this point. Okay, so as this fishbone architecture, I really like this because it clearly understands what components are involved and drive to your final target or what you're trying to achieve, designing an effective search pricing system. So we briefly understood what is the user demand. So do we need to cover onboarding new drivers? Because if there are no drivers, your pricing system doesn't really work. It's going to fall apart. If that's taken care of, you don't have to worry about that piece of the puzzle. You're only focusing on pricing. How are you going to move or navigate from 1x average price to 4x average price, which is capped? We talked about it in the assumptions. And how are you going to change that? Another important piece of the puzzle, which you might want to understand while designing the system, pricing system for Uber ride sharing app, is if the pricing is absorbed and who is being incentivized. If the driver is being incentivized, do you need a business rule around that? Meaning 60% of the surge price is paid back to the driver because they arrived in the 10-minute time frame or the wait time after the Uber request has been placed. Or maybe 60% goes to the platform because they did an effective recommendation or fulfilling the requests coming in from the Uber user. In that case, maybe you want to give 60% to the platform. So this variable and dynamic pricing incentive could be a good aspect to integrate, because you want to incentivize the driver and actually motivate them to reduce the wait time and be very methodical about how you can grow the whole customer experience. It is very important to talk about the customer experience, even though profitability is the key objective here for designing the pricing system. So you have a customer lens and also the actual product lens well embedded together. Okay, so what you see on top here is what operationally you're going to think about. User demand, driver supply, we very clearly talked about with few examples. The latency, the time between Uber requests that came in and the point when the driver has arrived. The scalability, you do want to talk about that, because once you design an experiment like an A/B test, you want to see how it can be scaled and maybe even run multiple experiments at the same time to understand other considerations like the 5 mile radius we are talking about, finding a driver in the 5 mile radius or 10 mile or 15 miles, and how that's going to change the equation. Maybe you want to do an experiment on making the price from 1x to 5x instead of capping at 4x. That's another experiment. And the bottom here, you're trying to understand the key ingredients, such as what is the stream processing. You want to make sure the data pipelines are working as expected, and your pricing system is adapting to the speed, and how we are going to finally understand the high level architecture. The data engine cannot fail. The management of the system cannot fail as well. Okay, these are the essential components. I'm going to share this diagram and the whole thought process with you in this YouTube video or my post on LinkedIn. So that covers a lot of important details for system design. Now let's dive into what is the flesh of the interview. So the flesh of the interview is you want to take time and talk about your hypothesis testing. You're going to design an experiment. In that A/B test design, you want to talk about your hypothesis, your success metrics, and how you're going to roll out once you see the and measure the results of the A/B test using some key components like statistical significance, practical significance, and understanding the biases and if the experiment ran successfully. So let's cover the hypothesis piece here, which is going to be important. You want to design the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis very clearly, which is where you are going to talk about the key metric or the randomization unit, where let's say my null hypothesis is you want to understand the average revenue per day per user is significantly is equal to the BAU. The new future state pricing system and the BAU, the existing pricing system, has no difference in the profitability, or in this case, your metric. Profitability is a business term. We cannot use that for null hypothesis. You're going to clearly lay out the metric, which is revenue per person per day. That's your metric you want to highlight. And your alternate hypothesis, the revenue per person per day, is significantly higher than when you compare the impact between the existing BAU pricing system and the future state pricing system. Okay, that is the first experiment you're going to understand, and multiple experiments can happen. A/B testing experiments can happen at the same time, where you're probably thinking about user demand, and the user demand is growing during these peak hours, right? Let's say user demand is 10x than average hour of a Uber user Uber user platform. And driver supply, if that's something they want you to consider, you want to think about how you are able to onboard new drivers. Maybe there's a pivot to giving 60% of the incentive of let's say 3x surge in pricing to the driver, because that will motivate the drivers to take more rides as a volume, and also help onboard more drivers that will help account for the demand and actually keep the platform up and running in a very efficient way. Okay, hope that made sense. So you're going to quickly, I'll at a high level, I wanted to walk over the architecture one more time. You are going to consider three main components. Component number one is clarify questions very clearly with an objective to narrow down the focus towards how we want to solve and design the pricing system. Component number two is lay down your assumptions, which are the guardrails. Very important, like you want to solve it for only assigning a driver in the 5 mile radius, that is the distance, and the latency, which is the time between the request coming into the Uber platform and actually driver arriving, which is fulfilling the request. And another key important aspect would be you want to make sure you leverage the incentive maybe to increase the overall customer experience, which is important. So yeah, all those considerations and guardrails are important. So component number two is assumptions and guardrails. Number three is the architecture and how you are going to navigate through the whole system design problem through A/B testing and understanding statistical significance and practical significance. How are you going to run the experiment? If the interviewer wants you to go into that level of detail, you want to go into that level of detail, or I would just keep it high level at 10,000 foot level. So that's all for now. Hopefully this made a lot of sense and it helps you during your future interviews or even some problem you want to design in your work today. Okay, we'll catch up soon with more interesting content. And until then, have a great day.